My sister-in-law slapped me at my own anniversary dinner in front of my own children because I served myself a plate of food before she had hers. Her hand crossed the table before I had even registered she was moving, and the sound of it in that dining room was the loudest thing I had heard in 11 years of marriage. My ears rang. My vision blurred white at the edges for a full second. "You forget your place in this family," she said, and her hand was still raised like she was proud of it. My husband looked down at his plate. The man I had loved since I was 22 years old, the man for whom I had quietly forgiven 1,000 smaller moments over a decade of Sunday dinners and holiday tables and the particular cruelty of people who operate in front of witnesses and count on you to be too gracious to respond, he looked at his plate and he said nothing. So I set down my fork. I wiped my hands on the linen napkin I had ironed myself that morning. I let the room go very quiet around me. And then I reached across that table and I slapped her back with the full weight of 11 years of silence behind it. The gasp that traveled around the table almost made me laugh. As if I were the one who had broken something. As if I were the one who had violated some sacred rule of this family's particular order. I stood up. I did not look at Wilhelmina. I did not look at Finanella, my mother-in-law, sitting at the end of the table with an expression I had learned years ago to read as the face of a woman who had already decided the outcome of any situation before it began. I looked at Grantham. Only Grantham. The man I had married, and for whom I had chosen, again and again, patience over truth. I told him something I had been keeping in my chest for years. A husband who cannot defend his wife in front of a room full of people does not deserve to remain her husband. He did not argue. He did not stand. He sat there with the particular stunned stillness of a man who has never once considered that his silence might carry a cost. I took my daughter Beatrix's hand in one of mine and my son Callahan's hand in the other, and I walked both of my children out of that dining room, out of that house, and into my car, still wearing the dress I had bought for the occasion. Let me take you back to the beginning, because 11 years is a long time to give a family that was quietly, methodically, and with great patience taking from you things you hadn't even noticed were gone. My name is Jocelyn Calloway, and I grew up in a house with a circular driveway. My father built half the office parks in our county from nothing but a construction loan and a stubbornness that his children inherited in different measures. I never wanted for anything material. What I wanted, the one thing money could not buy, was a love that felt like it had chosen me for me and not for everything surrounding me. Not arranged. Not brokered. Not selected for the compatibility of two family balance sheets. I found that love in a coffee shop 3 blocks from my college apartment on a rainy Tuesday when I was 22 years old, and the man who gave it to me drove a car with 200,000 miles on it and worked unglamorous hours at a mid-sized architecture firm sketching buildings he didn't yet have the seniority to design himself. Grantham Thorne made me laugh so hard that first afternoon that I spilled my coffee across the table and onto both of us, and neither of us cared. We talked for 4 hours. I missed a study group I had promised to attend and did not think about it until the next morning. My father was skeptical of him in the quiet way fathers are skeptical of men who arrive without a resume attached to their name. My mother worried more than once that a man marrying into money sometimes learns to tolerate the woman for the sake of everything that surrounds her. I told her she was wrong. I was 22 and certain and in love, and certainty at 22 does not ask very many hard questions. We married in a small ceremony in the garden behind my grandmother's old church. Grantham's family attended with a watchful stiffness I mistook at the time for shyness. It was not shyness. It was calculation, quiet and patient and already working. His mother, Finanella, ran her household like a small court with its own invisible hierarchy, its own rules about who spoke first and who deferred and what it meant when someone new arrived and did not understand any of it yet. His older sister, Wilhelmina, was the uncontested crown princess of that court, unmarried, financially dependent on a family catering business their late father had left behind, and quietly resentful of anyone who threatened to shift the family's center of gravity even a fraction. I was that threat, whether I intended to be or not. A woman with her own money, her own opinions, and a husband who, in those early years, actually looked at me like I mattered more than his sister's approval. That did not last nearly as long as I needed it to. The first real crack I remember clearly. It was our second Thanksgiving as a married couple, and I had spent the entire day cooking from a recipe card in my late grandmother's handwriting. Wilhelmina picked at the stuffing, set down her fork with a small deliberate clink against the china, and addressed the table at large. "It's sweet," she said, "when some people try so hard to prove they belong somewhere they clearly weren't born into." Everyone gave the small, uncomfortable laugh that people give when they know exactly what was meant and have chosen not to acknowledge it. Grantham reached for the gravy boat and changed the subject to football. I sat there holding my water glass too tightly and said nothing. The following year at my son Callahan's christening, Finanella cornered me near the coat closet while I was still holding my newborn. In the gentlest possible voice she told me that money could buy a beautiful nursery, dear, but it couldn't buy manners, and she did sometimes worry about what the grandchildren would absorb from being around so much of it. I stood there rocking my infant son and said nothing back. I had already learned by then that arguing only made the room colder for days afterward, and Grantham would not bring it back out on his own. 2 years after that, at Finanella's birthday, I had quietly covered the entire catering bill after Wilhelmina's supposedly thriving business came up short on funds at the last minute. Nobody thanked me. Wilhelmina simply remarked, loud enough for the caterers themselves to hear, that it was nice Jocelyn had finally found a use for all that family money besides decorating. I laughed along that night because laughing along had become its own quiet survival skill. A form of armor that looked, from the outside, like graciousness. There were dozens of these moments across the years. Small, precise cuts delivered with a smile, always in front of an audience large enough to make any response feel like an overreaction. Always followed by my husband's particular brand of silence. Not agreement. Just a steady, practiced refusal to spend a single ounce of his own comfort defending mine. I told myself year after year that it was worth it. That love meant absorbing a few sharp words for the sake of family unity. For the sake of my children having grandparents. For the sake of the man I had chosen over every safer option my parents had quietly made available. I told myself a great many things over 11 years of marriage. Every single one of them was a small, necessary lie so I could keep loving him without the resentment eating me alive. What I did not know, what I had no reason to know, because I had trusted my husband with the day-to-day banking while my design work kept me traveling, was that more than $60,000 had moved out of our joint household accounts over the previous 4 years in small, irregular transfers. Never large enough to raise a flag on their own. Easy to miss when you are on the road managing client installations and buying trips and trusting the person you married to manage the accounts you had both built. The money had gone to Wilhelmina. Not as gifts. As loans that were never repaid, funneled quietly through Grantham to keep his sister's catering business breathing long past the point where it should have been allowed to fail. Grantham had signed off on all of it. Using accounts I had funded almost entirely with my own earnings. Without telling me where the money actually went. But that was not the worst of it. Buried deeper in the financial disclosures my attorney pulled during the divorce proceedings was a notarized quitclaim form, dated 18 months earlier, attempting to transfer a 10% ownership stake in my house, the house my own father had helped me buy, the house I had funded every renovation of with money I earned myself, into Finanella's name. My signature sat at the bottom of the page in ink I had never put there. My attorney brought in a forensic document examiner who identified inconsistent pressure patterns and pen lift points that did not match my genuine signature on file with our mortgage lender. It was a convincing forgery, but not a perfect one. The county recorder's office had, as it turned out, flagged the transfer months earlier during their routine verification process and quietly held it pending documentation that was never provided. It had never gone through. But the attempt had been real, deliberate, and according to my attorney, very likely a criminal matter that would require the district attorney's financial crimes unit to spend months, not weeks, properly evaluating. There was more. Cross-referencing county records as a matter of habit, my attorney discovered that Finanella had attempted a nearly identical quitclaim maneuver once before, decades earlier, against her own late husband's sister, in a property dispute that had quietly settled out of public view. This was not a single lapse in judgment born from desperation. This was a pattern she had been running for years, waiting for the right unwatched moment to repeat it. And then there was Odessa. A former employee of Wilhelmina's catering business, who had quit 2 years earlier after going unpaid for a month, reached out to my attorney once word of the investigation quietly reached her. She had kept copies of invoices she had once been asked to inflate for family events, including my own anniversary dinner, so that a portion of what I had paid could be quietly redirected. It was a small amount compared to everything else, but it confirmed something I had begun to suspect the moment I saw the financial records. Nothing about that family's warmth toward me had ever been entirely what it appeared to be. I remember calling my father the evening my attorney walked me through the full picture. I sat alone in my car in Barnaby's parking garage because I could not bring myself to say the words inside my parents' house where the children might overhear. My father listened without interrupting, the way he had always listened when I was small. And when I finished, he said only, "You built that house with your own 2 hands as much as any contractor did. Nobody takes that from you while I'm still breathing." It was not a legal strategy. It was simply what I needed to hear. The 2 years that followed moved slower than I wanted and in some ways faster than I feared. The divorce proceedings moved forward on the strength of a paper trail I had not realized I had been building for years, photographs, calendar entries, and messages showing I had managed every school event, every doctor's appointment, every midnight fever, while Grantham consistently deferred to his mother's opinions about how our children should be raised. The court awarded me primary custody. It required Grantham to complete a full accounting of the diverted funds before certain visitation terms were finalized. He agreed to a settlement that included full restitution, paid in structured installments. Wilhelmina's catering business folded within the first year of the family finally cutting off the money that had never truly been theirs to give. Fininella, facing real possibility of exposure over both the quitclaim attempt and the decades-old pattern my attorney had unearthed, retreated from any further contact entirely, not out of remorse, I suspect, but out of the very practical calculation that continued proximity now carried a cost she could no longer afford. My daughter Beatrix struggled more than Callahan did in those early months. She was old enough to sense something had fundamentally shifted, but too young to have words for it. She asked me once, curled against my side on the sofa, whether it was her fault. Whether serving her own plate at dinner had somehow made things worse that night. I held her face in both my hands and told her the truth in words I wanted her to carry for the rest of her life. Nothing about that dinner had ever been about a plate. It had been about a woman who needed someone smaller than her to feel powerful over. And that had never, for one single second, been anything Beatrix had done wrong. Callahan, in his own 5-year-old way, just asked when he would get his own room back. I promised him a version of home that did not yet exist. Then I built it. Somewhere in the middle of that second year, I noticed something shift in myself that I had not expected. My design firm grew faster in those 2 years than it had in the previous 5 combined. Clients started asking, gently, why my work suddenly felt bolder. Less careful. Less concerned with pleasing every possible taste in a room. I did not have a clever answer. I just knew that a version of me who no longer spent half her energy managing someone else's family had a great deal more energy left over for everything else. Grantham asked to see me once more before the divorce was finalized. He sat across from me in Barnaby's conference room, older somehow than he had looked 2 years earlier, and said the words I had once, years ago, given almost anything to hear. "I'm sorry for all of it. I should have chosen you every single time and I didn't." I believed in the moment that he meant it. But an apology offered only after the money is found and the papers are signed is not repentance. It is damage control, arriving years too late to mean what it might once have meant. I had spent 11 years forgiving smaller versions of that same silence, hoping each time that the next slight would be the one that finally changed him. The anniversary dinner had simply been the last in a decade-long accumulation of them, and I was done handing out forgiveness in exchange for nothing. "I know," I told him quietly. "But I am not the same woman who kept forgiving you for it. I have no interest in going back to being her." The divorce was finalized on a gray Tuesday. I walked out of that courthouse holding both of my children's hands, the same way I had walked them out of that dining room 2 years earlier. Except this time I was not running from anything. I was walking toward the rest of our lives in a house that finally, fully, belonged only to us. My business partner Hyan threw a small dinner the week the divorce was finalized. Nothing elaborate, just her kitchen table crowded with mismatched chairs and too much food. But it was the first anniversary of anything I had celebrated in years where every person at the table actually wanted me there. I served myself first that night without thinking twice. Nobody so much as blinked. My mother sat across from me watching my children argue happily over the last dinner roll, and told me quietly that she had not seen me laugh that easily in over a decade. She was right. And I had not even noticed the difference in myself until she said it out loud. Beatrix asked me recently why Aunt Wilhelmina does not come to her birthday parties anymore. I told her the truth in words a 7-year-old could carry. Some people forget that love is not something you are allowed to take for granted just because someone keeps giving it freely. Sometimes the people who love us most have to be the ones who finally teach them where that giving stops. I think about that dinner often. Not the slap itself, I have never regretted returning it. I think about the silence that came right before it. 11 years of silence from the one person who was supposed to stand between me and a room full of people who had decided, long before I arrived, exactly where they intended to keep me. I learned in the end that the place I truly belonged had never been at the foot of someone else's table, waiting to be allowed to eat. It was at the head of my own. And on the night I finally stood up and walked away from the table they had spent 11 years trying to put me under, I took my children, my dignity, and the two most important people in my world, and I walked out into the dark and I did not look back. Not because I was afraid of what I would see, but because there was nothing behind me anymore worth turning around for. The house is mine now. The firm is mine. The children sleep in rooms I chose for them, in a home where nobody sits at the head of the table unless they have earned the right to be there. My daughter plays soccer on Saturdays and talks constantly about a girl named Priscilla on her team who she says is her best friend in the entire world. My son has built an entire city out of couch cushions in the living room and informed me yesterday that I am not allowed to dismantle it until he says so, which I have respected completely. I served myself first at my own table and someone raised her hand to me for it. What she did not understand, what none of them understood, was that I had been keeping count for 11 years. And the night that hand crossed the table was the night the count finally ran out. That is all it ever was. A woman who had given everything, and finally gave herself permission to stop.